Hello, Education 523. Hope all is going well and the semester has started off smoothly for you. Dr. Allen here. Before I jump into everything, I guess this is our first real week with the class. Last week was just kind of a get to know. I had mentioned that I would touch base a little more on the action plan, so I wanted to kind of share that with you before we kind of talk about the content. And without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen and get going. Try to save these videos from getting too crazy long. And let's see if that works. Hey, that worked great. And I should have everything up here. All right. A few things before I kind of talk about the content this week, just what the overview is for the week. I'm just going to go ahead and hit the syllabus. I had mentioned last week that I would talk about the action plan. I was kind of hemming and hawing how to approach that. I had the general idea, and I know it's posted, but I still felt like I owed it to you all to kind of have a little better plan, so to speak. This week, though, before we kind of get into it, we're going to talk about hero making and a little bit on the 1619 project. Again, I think I said it in the first video. I promise not to this isn't going to be like an hour-long video or anything like this. A lot of this is based on readings and contents and ed puzzles, but I want to at least give you an overview of everything. The things that are due this week are going to be discussion 1, ed puzzle 1, and your readings for the next week on low and 3 and 4. And I'll show you again at the instance of the first week where the discussions are and everything. So that's the first part. Now, I mentioned that I would show you what is needed for the action plan, which is due at the end of the semester. Well, the end of our class, which is midterm, basically. If you look here under action plan, and I will post this up under this week. I don't think it's there right at this particular moment, but get a drink here before I talk. Talking to myself, there's no one else in here, and to you all, I still needed a drink. If you click here, this will be posted. There is an action plan description and rubric that is posted. I don't think it's complex. You are welcome to contact me if you have any questions, though. It outlines what a good action plan is. It's clearly linked to specific strategies, it's all connected. Who's responsible for aspects of an activity or a plan within it, and kind of a reasonable time frame. With all that being said, I still outlined the goals specifically that I was looking for. I want this to be 3 to 5 pages, double spaced, times new room, and 12-inch. Pretty standard stuff there. It needs to be 3 to 5 pages in total, not for each goal. I don't think that's crazy long or anything like that. My understanding, especially for those of you that are in the curriculum instruction program, you have a lot of writing that you're doing right now and working with your thesis. So I'm trying not to compound that too much if I can avoid it. Does need to be an APA format. I would like 5 sources on a bibliography page, just as far as like if you have to do a little bit of research on some ideas, how you would maybe implement this, just make sure that you cite them. If you cite anything in the work or you do a little bit of research, obviously, just make sure you have them on the bibliography page. With that being said, this is what you need to do for the action plan. Using the goals listed below, and I'll go over them. Provide an action plan of methods or techniques that your school could use to achieve each. You can address each goal as it's each entity. So you can kind of just focus on that goal if you want when you're writing the paper, like goal 1. This is how I would do it. You can, that's basically what I'm saying there, write a response to each goal. If you want, you can make it one large paper if you want to, as long as you're addressing the goals. I'm kind of flexible in that aspect. Look at this from a school point of view, but if you think it would be easier for you to look at it from your own individual classroom point of view instead of the school, that's fine also. And what I mean is can you do some of these goals within your professional self or within your own classroom, maybe with older students or younger students? That's fine too, just as long as you're addressing the goals and ways that you can meet those goals. If you think it would be easier to do it as a whole school, that's also fine. I'm fine either way. I think the important thing is that you're just thinking about these goals and how they can influence the school. The goals themselves, how would you create and sustain welcoming, supporting, and an inclusive classroom and school? So just different ways that you would, make your school or classroom more inclusive. 2, Attract and retain a greater number of individuals from historically underrepresented populations in the ranks of school faculty. Now, I know from the classroom point of view, that one might be something that you can't really address. That is fine, and I will pick that up if you're doing it from a classroom point of view. But if you're doing it from a school point of view, that might be one that you definitely need to look at. That's an area that actually a lot of schools in general, even in higher ed, we struggle with it in I think in our classes, and I'm sorry, let me rephrase it. It's something that we work on within our School of Education, even as trying to get more students from different backgrounds into our program, whether it's socioeconomic, whether it's related to gender, race, all those things. So that's something that's very timely, and a little tongue-tied there, but I think you know what I'm talking about. Ensure that teachers and administrators maintain current on diversity trends. So i.e., how would you do this? Obviously, PDs are a good way to think about that, or professional development, maybe what type of PDs you would do, who you would bring in. There's a whole bunch of stuff on the interweb that has ideas and speakers you can bring in. Developing and strengthening partnerships within the community of your local area. And number 5, ensuring the curriculum includes significant multicultural perspectives, which we'll kind of talk about in this class. You can use some of the resources and ideas from here for that. That's what I want you to write your action plan on. Just kind of focus on those 4 goals. You can, like I say, you can do them each individually, or you can just write it as one big paper. As long as I'm seeing the ideas, that's fine. 3 to 5 pages, double space, rubric is there. I will post this, but it is already under assignment, and it is due on the 23rd of February. So you are welcome to, this is one that I've already opened. You are welcome to go ahead and submit this if you want. It's the one thing that I do have where your work, you can definitely work ahead. The other things I kind of like to do week to week because it relates to our class. Okay, with that being said, that's the assignment. Feel free to email me though if you have any questions. This week, we're in week 2. When you're watching this, I'm going to open week 2 up a little early. You will know this if you're probably watching this already, because week 1 was just an intro, and I want to give everyone enough time to kind of get going. We're actually going to talk about heroes in education and the approaches of it. I know I default to social studies, and I think a lot of these fall into that social studies type of content and topics, I guess, so to speak. But still, I think you can even think about it again from different cultural or classroom type points of view. Readings this week will be Lowen's 3 and 4. Hopefully you're finding that interesting. I'm going to talk about chapters 1 and 2 in this video here in a second. And your assignments are going to be view video. That's this. There's an ed puzzle. Hopefully everyone's gotten registered, but the link is down below if you need it. And discussion 1. All right. Here's what I want to talk about, and then I'll come back and revisit everything. Down here, I kind of put my notes up there. I was going to do a really fancy PowerPoint, but I thought, you know what, because of time and limits, I just went ahead and just posted my notes that I kind of do and work off of, and I thought that might work. I'll just discuss it, and I'll probably speak a little bit as a stream of consciousness, and we'll kind of go from there. But if you did your readings this week on Lowen, one thing that he talks about that we really struggle with, I think, in education is the heroification of content. Now, I put Lowen's definition on there, but what this is it's through a process our educational media turns flesh and blood individuals into pious, perfect creatures without conflicts, pain, credibility, or human interest. Basically, this is the George Washington cutting down the cherry tree. This is, Christopher Columbus, which he's going to talk a lot about. You're probably going to catch that in the readings. It's holding these people up to a higher level. Now, I will say this before I jump into talking about what Lowen's talking about and just in general. I actually just listened to a podcast on this. I may actually share it. And they were talking about, it's related to Wounded Knee. And if anyone knows about that, that's the Native American massacre that a lot of times is seen as ending the, what they call the Indian Wars in the West. I think it was 1890. And it talks, the podcast was talking about hero history a little bit. And they did get into the idea of whether is hero history a good thing or a bad thing? Like when you're teaching elementary school, is it good to have heroes, get students interested in topics and discussions? By the way, not even from a social studies point of view, but just from a human interest point of view, where you go in and you discuss things, you debate whether things are good or bad, and you learn these skills. but are the heroes a good way to kind of a gateway in? And once students learn about it and get interested, then you start breaking down the people. I've heard that approach. In some ways, I think there is a lot of merit to it. But then some people are more along the lines of, we shouldn't actually hold these people up from the beginning. We need to kind of hit the ground running and tell people that, it's not just, to put it quite simply, old white guy history. We need to expand. If you think about how we teach presidents, everyone thinks about it in a straight line, like, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, boom, 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 and they just keep going. Lowen actually kind of gets into this whole concept. And again, I'm not telling you anything. Hopefully you didn't read, but he does talk about Woodrow Wilson a little bit. And of course, what is he talking about? He is seen as a hero, World War I. That's always portrayed in textbooks and even in class lectures as a major U.S. high point. Talks about the League of Eight Nations. Talks about the role in women's suffrage. Actually, I put lack of, because if I was an old history major, and if you've ever read about Woodrow Wilson, that wasn't something that he was pro doing, at least initially. But Lowen also makes the point that, this is the stuff that we focus on when we teach classes. And again, this could go across a lot of curriculum. If you're talking about someone who created a scientific method, a lot of times if we're looking at them as a bio, so to speak, we might only look at the highlights of what makes them famous as opposed to maybe some of the gaps that they have as human beings. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Again, it's up for debate, but this is heroification. Some of the things that Woodrow Wilson, that he thought, or at least Lowen thinks that we need to mention a little more, I did put it as a bullet, but, he got involved in Russian politics. That's during the Red Scare of the 1920s and the first so-called Red Scare. He actually sent troops there. As you can see, and this is something that we'll get into a little bit more with this class, but he sent troops to Cuba, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama. This is a history that we don't hear lots about. And actually, I talk about this in some of my methodology classes. A lot of times we talk more about Europe and even Asia than we do what's going on in South America or Central America. A lot of people don't even know the countries down there and may not even recognize those names. Again, this is kind of going into Lowen's point of view that, it's kind of hero history. Let's look at the good with Woodrow Wilson, but let's not look at these things that he did that might be negative and tarnish his image, so to speak. Woodrow Wilson is also, and he has, if you ever are interested in those presidential rankings, he has seemed to slip a little bit, and a lot of it is rooted in this. Most people do think that he was a Southerner. He was pretty racist. I think most people are along those beliefs now. He removed most African Americans from federal government positions. And he also followed, Taft was before him, but Teddy Roosevelt was in there before, where Teddy Roosevelt had started to open the White House up a little bit more with people like Booker T. Washington visiting and such. So he's kind of a step back. Also, again, that same podcast I was listening to, I'm going to put this up there now that I keep referencing it. But when they were talking about a little bit of hero history, actually, it was a different episode of the podcast, but they were talking about how the first film that was actually screened in the White House was called The Birth of a Nation, which, if anyone's familiar with that film, it basically celebrates the Ku Klux Klan. That's a very quick summary, but look it up. It's a very famous film. That's kind of what Lowen's getting into with this concept of heroification. So if you look here, this is stuff that's kind of going to tarnish Wilson's image. And this is what we kind of focus on because it holds him up. I'm using the mouse, but to a higher level. And of course, we do this with other heroes too. Helen Keller. And he's not saying necessarily a lot of the stuff with Helen Keller is bad, where it doesn't talk about her being a very big activist for the poor and disabled. And also that some people think that she was a radical socialist. I've even read before that some people would just consider her a flat out communist. Not that these are evil things or bad things, and they're her own opinions, but it's something that kind of, at least from the American point of view, kind of tarnishes her background. So, it's easier when you teach just to talk about her overcoming her life to become successful. And usually this whole narrative ends with Keller going to Radcliffe College, her and Anne Sullivan working with the well and the hand and the water dripping on her hand and her learning things and speaking. That's all. It's majorly heroic. But it's like, Helen Keller lived after she was 18. There was other things that happened. You don't hear much about that. So that's what Lowen's getting into with this heroification. We kind of definitely edit out some parts that might ruffle some feathers. Basically what Lowen is preaching, and something that we're going to do an exercise on, but I went ahead and I'm going to highlight it now. A lot of people call it people's history, which is an attempt basically to educate through the perspective of common people rather than through leaders, which I think we definitely do. It's usually associated with Howard Zinn, but it's really rooted in something called the History Workshop Journal. It's an old historical journal that had some socialist type leanings. And it got into maybe looking at things from more of a group or societal as a whole, the common person, so to speak, as opposed to just one or two great people. It's often called history from below, people's history is. And I have it on here, I'll click this. We're gonna actually do something with Zinn, but as you look here, I want to make sure I keep talking about other content areas. A people's history of science, miners, midwives, and low mechanics. It actually has references to ways that you can maybe integrate history or content with different areas. So this would be maybe a good science lesson, and talking about how miners, midwives, and low mechanics actually developed a lot of the scientific methods in the Middle Ages and things like that. So I put the link up there if you're interested. Let me go back. The hero history. It's a pretty timely concept, the hero versus people history. The other thing this week that you're going to do an ed puzzle on this. You're going to view the video, but I felt like we couldn't do this course without at least talking briefly, or at least somewhat, about this because it's in the news so much. And that's the 1619 project. If you're pretty up on the news, you've probably heard about this, but the 1619 project was something that was started in 2019, and it's a collection of stories and essays, just reading verbatim, that put slavery and its consequences at the center of America's historical narrative. Basically, it gets into the concept that at every turn or every event in U.S. history, slavery had an influence on it. Like it says there, it was published a couple years ago. It gets into the whole idea of consequences of slavery. It has become a little bit of a hot button topic because it's connected to critical race theory a lot of times, and debate about whether this type of curriculum should be adapted. I will say this, I think all curriculum definitely has to have different points of view in it. And I think you definitely need to look at things from different perspectives. Even if you wouldn't take the whole project as your standards, there are probably aspects of it that you could incorporate into your class and look at different types of points of view. Again, I know there are a lot of strong feelings on this one way or the other, but it's definitely something that's being debated. Now, I will say this, there has been a lot of debate on what is actually in the 1619 project. A lot of prominent historians and political commentators have talked about how some of the facts and data might not be accurate because it was written by mostly journalists and not historians. This was actually heavily debated, and actually I believe a lot of these historians actually wrote a letter to the New York Times. By the way, a lot of these historians would not be what you would consider conservatives at the time that they issued the letter. It was actually, I think there was an appendage added about some people critiquing this. At least the New York Times had it in some of the publications, but in 2020 they actually removed it. I'm sorry, it was in the editor's notes. I'm looking at my face and not my notes itself. They removed it from the editor's notes, and there's not that little ad lib about maybe some people critiquing or questioning some of the historical facts about it. I'm not here really to make the point of whether it's right or wrong. I'm really just kind of here that I think you might want to be familiar with it. And there are things that when you're teaching your classes, you do need to look at things from different lenses. And I don't think I'm saying anything that's groundbreaking here, but it's very timely. And by the way, this work did win the Nobel Prize for Literature. Actually, I think I was at Books A Million the other day, and there is the publication of the book of it. I have actually on our site, I think that was it. Let me go back here. I actually have the New York Times Magazine version of it. I may need to download it as a PDF, because if you look at the New York Times article, if you read the New York Times regularly, I think it runs out of the number of articles that you can look at. I put it up there if you're interested in checking it out. And also there was an article from the Washington Post about the 1619 project if you're interested. These are not required readings. And by the way, I should give proper due. Nicole Hannah Jones is actually the lady who's credited with actually creating or developing the 1619 project. And there's an article about from a teacher or professor why they actually use it. And they actually acknowledge that there might be things that they don't know if they're accurate or not. So it's an interesting read. I didn't make it a required reading, but it is there if you want to check it out. Hearification. Basically, what we're going to be looking at least some things when you're in your class you need to look at or think about is if you're doing curriculum, should it be from a hero type point of view, or I guess some people call it great man syndrome, and then, or should you do it more from a people's history type perspective? Again, it's very interesting stuff. I'm going to hit that, and we're going to go back. What you need to do this week. One, we have our first discussion board. And actually, I just kind of mentioned this, but Lowen defines hearification in the beginning chapter, specifically speaking on Columbus in chapter 2. I might touch on Columbus here in a second. Do you feel that using heroes in education, all subjects do it, is a good thing or a bad thing? And by the way, I'm not judging. I'm not looking for an opinion that is the same as mine or not. As long as it's well-reasoned and developed, you're good to go. The only thing I asked is you do not have to reply to anyone, but if you do feel the need to, make sure that it is always respectful and courteous, so to speak. I'm not saying everyone has to agree with everything. After you do your discussion, there is an Ed puzzle. The Ed puzzle is on the 1619 project, and it is actually narrated by Dr. Jones. If you click it there, hopefully you're registered for EdTPA. That was on last week's material, and you'll just go in and such. I have to log in, so I'm not going to go there, but it should be right there. If you do have problems getting into Ed puzzle, it should take you right to it. I'm just not logged in. Let me know, and I'll see what's going on and get it fixed for you. So it's a distance learning class or a virtual class, so I'm sure there'll be headaches that we'll run into at some point. That should mostly do this week. Those are the two big things. Again, we'll do some more coming up in the coming weeks, but check out the 1619 project, do the discussion, view the video. You can start working on your action plan if you want to. Again, that might sneak up onto you a little quicker than you think, but you still have all this month and most of the next month to get that done. And I think, oh, there's the Zen project. Why don't I point that out real quick? There's the Zen projects with 1619 project if you're interested. By the way, so I don't babble too much. If you had a chance to read chapter 2, you definitely got into some of the Columbus type stuff. Columbus is definitely someone whose star has fallen. I would say I taught middle school for most of my career, and I was amazed. It was almost like a social type study, not social studies, but a social study. How Columbus, even from when I started until I left, how students actually portrayed him. And I would say most of my students by the end definitely were not fans of Columbus. I have something, I'm pointing to it out because I have it hanging out in the hall. It was called the Periodic Chart of Dictators, Despots, and Despised. And Columbus is actually on there. They give them skulls based on how evil they are portrayed or how some people may see him. And I think Columbus had 3 or 4. We used to do an exercise where you would pick someone on there and give them skulls. And Columbus was always picked by one student every year. And it seemed like Columbus would end up with 8 or 9 or 10 skulls. So, and I don't know if that would have happened when I started teaching in the late 90s, early 2000s. So with all that being said, now I think I am done. I hope everyone's off to a good start. And again, if you have any questions, you're welcome to contact me anytime. Dr. Allen, just fire me an email. Hopefully everything's went smooth. I'm kind of starting to fish around a little bit. I'm recording this on Tuesday, the 11th. So it's the second day of the semester, and it looks like everyone's been getting in and such. So that being said, thank you very much. And sorry, I'm looking at my screen. I probably should do this. Not that you all care. I should have myself like right in front of me so I'm not looking at it. I guess I'm always looking to see how I'm talking. You don't care about any of this. So with that being said, I'll catch you all later. I'm going to go ahead and stop my share and tell you all have a good week. And I hope everyone's semester has started off smooth. Thank you.